Well, I'm delighted really to chat with you about one of my oldest friends. And it's really it's a fun story because I was a very, very young, very, very little boy. I was 10 and three quarters, and my grandfather, who lived in Folkestone in England, came to the United States for a visit. My parents were living with me in New York, and I went back with him on this beautiful, beautiful ship, the Mauretania. When I got on board, there was a party and people saw me off. But after we sailed and after we passed by the Statue of Liberty, it became rather a little lonely, and I wasn't sure what to do. And I wandered around the ship, and then an older boy, a man, came up to me and said, "Where are you going, young man?" And I said, "Oh, I'm just wandering." And he saw I had a camera around my neck, a little brownie camera. And he asked, "Oh, do you take a lot of pictures?" I show the movies on the ship, and my eyes lit up. My father had been in the photographic business, and I knew a little bit about showing movies from home movies and things like this. And he said, "Would you like to come with me and see how we show real movies in a real cinema?" Cinema was not a word I had ever known or remembered. Uh, and so I went with him, and I actually kept a diary of that time, and I wrote things like, "I went with Alf, and we showed a movie today, and Alf took me into the first class projection booth, and he began to teach me." And he said, "Now, if you were a real projectionist, the first thing you would learn is how to safely rewind movies." And then we did it together. And then he taught me about the changeovers and the motor and the over prompts and cues. And I was as excited as any little child could be at that time. This was an absolute phenomenon that this man could take an interest in this tiny little child who was traveling with his elderly grandfather on that magnificent ship. By the time we docked in England, I knew that they were 90 feet a minute in the 35 millimeter films that went through the projector, and I knew how to thread the projectors to make sure that the start of the print would start from that reel on at the right time, and I knew they were 24 frames per second. And then he started to teach me about carbon arcs and back projection, and by the time I got off that ship, I was so excited that I was determined not just to be a projectionist, but I was going to be a projectionist on a cruise ship. And I fell madly in love with cruise ships and passenger ships. At that time, one could go and visit passenger ships, and I loved to do it. And I did it quite often as relatives came. And when Alf came that fall on the Mauretania back to New York, I had given him my phone number. And it was so exciting because he called, and my parents invited him for dinner, and we have a wonderful picture of the time when he came to visit. And I worshipped him kind of like an older brother, but somebody who had done all of the things that I was determined I was going to do for the rest of my life. We went on, and then all of a sudden, he didn't come anymore. And I got a letter from him, and he said he had fallen in love and he was going to get married. That was the last time I had seen him then for a while, but I did carry on a correspondence with him. We played chess games for a while. I visited him once in Liverpool, and then slowly we drifted apart. I then went on to do projection as a hobby. I earned a little bit of extra money while I was a student, and went on and I studied medicine. I went to medical school, I did my training, and then I joined a fairly well-known cancer center in Houston and became professor of cardiology and medicine. And time went on and the decades went on, but there was one episode in between where I had some time off, and a friend of mine said, "Why don't you go out on a ship?" And my eyes lit up. I thought, wow, I would love to do this. I signed on a ship, and it was called the Island Venture. It was the sister ship of the Sea Venture, and those two ships then later on became the Love Boat. Now people say, were you really the real doctor on the Love Boat? Yes, I was, but what I did was I kept sneaking into the projection booths and helping the electricians show the movies. At that time, they weren't 35 millimeter anymore. They were 16 millimeter, but I loved it. I was on the Love Boat for 2 years. Alf knew nothing about this. We had lost touch. And then one day I looked and I found an article that he had written in the Liverpool Echo. And I said, this must be him. And I wrote him a long letter. I remembered the book that he had suggested that I buy and read, The Complete Projectionist by Cricks, which I almost memorized as a child. I reminded him of those things, and we got back together. And now I am over in Great Britain several times a year, and Liverpool is on my list of places. And he and I have rebonded. We look quite different than we did in 1953, but we still like to talk about the 90 feet a minute and the 24 frames a second and the projectionist that I almost became. But it's been 62 years, and the things he taught me, I still remember to this day. Nobody uses carbon arc lamps anymore, but I still know how to put the carbons in. I don't remember the make and model of the projectors on the ship, but I do remember that in the first class cinema, there was projection through a projection booth, and it was the normal forward projection. In the cabin class and the tourist class, the projectors had a mirror, and they were back projection using a different type of screen. And that screen was specially designed in some way almost like a ground glass, so that one could see the film and one needed a much shorter distance and different types of lenses. And all of those things were what Alf was able to teach me, that you didn't necessarily need to show films from in front of the screen. You could actually show them from the back of the screen, but you might have to use mirrors, and in some instances you actually had to thread the film backwards in the projector to make it look right on the screen. And all of this were things that he drilled into me as a little 10 3/4-year-old runt. The crossing was somewhat rough, and there were a couple of days when I wasn't feeling all that well. Children are somewhat susceptible to motion sickness, and I was no exception to that fact. But on days when I felt well enough, I spent most of the time in the projection booths with Alf.
If you could choose one, I know it's really difficult, but if you had one thing that comes to mind about that journey, because when you think it was only 5 days journey, but those 5 days had an enormous impact on the whole of your life. If you could kind of isolate one, is there a funny memory of him? Is there?
I remember that on one of the first days out, Alf was really excited about a film. And he said, we have to be very careful with this film. It's a brand new print. It's the first print on a ship. And the title of the film, A Queen is Crowned. And this was the movie that had been produced. Some people said that it actually was processed in an airplane flying it to the United States. I don't know whether that story is true or not, but the coronation was in the first days of June, and we had sailed on June 20th. And I remember watching the first showing on the ship of A Queen is Crowned from the projection booth with Alf, and he was saying, "Don't look at that now, we have a changeover coming in 3 minutes. Get ready for your changeover, Mike." And that was, if there was, you asked for one moment, I remember the changeover in A Queen is Crowned. But we also had Peter Pan on that ship. We had Twice Upon a Time, an adaptation of an old German story, and all kinds of movies. And I still remember the names of these films because I didn't only get to see them in cabin class where we were. Our cabin was C94. I remember them because we showed them in all three classes, and he took me by hand across the barriers into the first class and into the third class to show the movies. An amazing man. He was 19 at the time. I couldn't have been any happier if it had been the captain. It was, for me, the person on board that if I had to pick, who would you like to meet on a ship, it would have been the projectionist, and he found me wandering around with the little brownie camera around my neck.
Wow.
And here we are, and we get together, and we'll have a dinner together when I get to Liverpool. And it's as exciting to see him now as it was 60 years ago.
So did you meet Jean?
I met her only once. It must have been in the late 50s, I think. It could also have been in 61 when I was in England. And it was a very short visit. I may have spent a night in their home, but that was just kind of before we then lost touch. And I'm not sure why. I mean, we had a correspondence. I still have all of his letters. If you like, I'll bring them in July, along with the diary of the ship and all of these pictures. But he was important enough in my life that I kept all of this stuff, and I also kept the complete Projectionist, dog-eared, read to the pulp. I did a wonderful gig with one of your theatrical icons about 10 years ago, Bernard Cribbins. We did a revival of a fairly large-scale revival of My Fair Lady.
Oh, fantastic!
I'm a character actor for them, have been for years, and Bernard Cribbins was was Mr. Doolittle. It kind of got me interested in not just how the films are shown, but the projectionist is the final step in the whole process. It starts with the screenwriter or the script and the director and the actors and the actresses, and then it gets on film, and the projectionist should be thought of as somebody who then brings it back to life in the cinema. And if it isn't done right, if it doesn't sound right, if it doesn't look right, if there's a problem with the changeovers that distract from what the artists on the screen are trying to do, then the projectionist has totally nullified everything that's really important that all of these other people have done to create this. And that's one of the things that I think Alf tried to show me, but it didn't really gel till later, that there has to be such professionalism. The curtain has to open at the right moment or the image isn't right. If it opens too far and there's a little bit of the screen showing where the film might be out of focus, it's not right. All of these things have to be done right to bring back to life the artistry of the actors and the actresses, along with the director and the score of the music and the whole process. And the projectionist, while never getting the credit for putting the show on, has the ability to really make it right or make it terrible. And that came a little later. It's not so much the case anymore, but back then, if there was a notch on the film, one had to cut it in such a way that it wouldn't jam. These people were in many ways the showmen at the cinema, and they had to do it in such a way. The lights had to go off at the right way, at the right speed. And many of them in cinemas, certainly not on ships, but in the cinemas then that I got to visit as I grew older and got to see these were people then who did all kinds of other tasks, including the emergency lighting, the electrical phenomena that were needed for the carbon arc lamps was very intricate. And that also gave me a little bit of inspiration to study electronics and to study physics and things that then helped me migrate into chemistry and biology and ultimately into the field of medicine. And Alf at 19 had it all. I mean, the whole idea of playing music first in what was called the non-sync back then, because it was a sound system that wasn't synchronized to the actual images, timing it so that it would end at the time the show was to start and not be cut off in the middle. All of these things were things that Alf tried to teach me, and he had 5 days to do it. And I learned quite a bit. I was very, very excited and proud that I got off that ship knowing a whole bunch about something I had dreamed of learning later on in life, and Alf taught me. He's an extraordinary man. I mean, he grew up in a very troubled time, and yet he was just so approachable to a little boy. An amazing story. And thank you so much for allowing me to share it.